And there we go. What's going on, guys? I'm here with Jordan. Looks like we have funny animator, Mr. Jim in the chat. We played in
Yeah.
an earlier round, I believe. It was either Lone Wolf or the 45-45 League. Another good player. But thanks for doing this, Jordan. Taking your time out on a weekend. I know you had a stream earlier today, but we've been trying to get together. I did a review before with. I do that with Miss Bees before, and I thought that kind of went well,
Yeah,
and
Millsby.
wanted to do that again. So thanks for hopping on the stream with me.
Yeah, you bet.
Alrighty, I see you're in the study here. Let me go back to the start of our game, and maybe you want to talk a little bit before we jump right into the game. I know your top board is it Susie or Suze?
Susie Dent, yeah.
Yeah, Susie Den. I know I saw it in some of the chat afterwards. Obviously, if you go to like my Lichess page, I pretty much purely play 1e4. And I don't know if I actually have any other games, even in Blitz, or I don't even know if I have any bullet games, but of e4 only. So I mean, what were some of the ideas that you guys were bringing to the table if we ended up going down like the 1e4 route?
Oh, Susie Dent told me to play the French. He
The
he was
French.
he was yeah, he was my he was my kind of prep person. So he saw the games like, "Oh, you should play this French."
Yeah,
You know,
I've been
whatever.
struggling against the
He plays these
French.
all the time. That's what he said. He goes, "You should play the French. It looks like he's struggling in it."
Yeah.
And whatever. So that was kind of my plan, was to say, "Okay, I'll
D-
just play a French and
Okay,
see what
did
happens."
you so that was the extent of your prep. So I play I guess the advanced French and then I play the move Queen G4 on move 4. So after I push the pawn, I usually try to sacrifice the pawn on D4 and go from there. So would have maybe had another exciting
Yeah.
game, a little bit more exciting than the start of our game, but for
Yeah, our
myself,
game was a lot quieter. So no, I was prepared for wild French because that's what Susie that told me. Like
okay,
he plays
okay.
the French, he generally struggles, but he also plays very sharp French lines where
Yes.
you make
Yes.
a mistake and you get hit real hard type thing. Yeah, that's right, funny animator Jim.
Yeah.
Actually I don't have seconds. What I have is a board one who is like,
Really.
please stop losing. Let me give you some prep to try to help you win.
Yes, I'm pulling
So
it up.
Susie does that helping me. Board two is a struggle for me, and I'm
Dude,
not
there's a
playing
lot of
Lichess recently.
I this is my second or third time playing in this league. I think I played um like 4 or 5 years ago, and I was nowhere near 2,000 rating on Lichess at the time. So I'm not sure what board I exactly played. I'd have to go take a look. But yeah, being board two, and then at the end of last season is when I kind of rejoined the league, and I was an alternate for board three. And board, unfortunately, I let my classical rating get a little too high here, and they put me on board two going into this season. It's a struggle
Yeah,
out there, man.
I
Like,
knew I was going to be either a very low board two, I was going to be a really high board three. I didn't know how it was going to shake out, but yeah, I know from past experience. I used to play board two a lot, but people have gotten a lot better over the years because my ratings pretty much been the same. I had a peak of like over to like 2150 when I got to play board one
oh,
once,
nice.
which is awesome because I got
Yeah,
to play like the Loveless, who used to play as an international master, and
yeah,
a bunch of board one players who are like, way better than me. So
yeah.
I got destroyed
Think that's
that
like the
season. So sorry
cutoff,
for my
right? It's
team
like,
that season, but I had fun, But my
yeah,
team was kind of like, okay, so every game on board one's a loss, and
yeah.
like,
We're not starting
but
down at
anyways,
one.
usually though I've been in board two, and then I got down to board three, and I think I got board four. The season that we won, I think, is when I got board four because we swapped mid-season. My board three and four, we swapped. We were so close in rating, so like I think it was like 2 rounds into it, and then I got to play board four, which was like a huge boon for our team because
Okay,
essentially I was
the
a
rating
board two,
gap
board three.
was
Now I'm playing board four opponents,
gotcha,
so
gotcha.
I did really well that season on that switch.
Yeah, you
But
get. I mean, you get the
board two,
spectrum.
I
I mean,
know
like,
once I get past board three, you got to play better chess generally, and you have to know something about the openings because people are too good, and they'll punish you if you just play whatever. Generally, like if they know more about chess. I mean, that's
oh,
why
for
they were
sure.
board twos, and things like that. So I knew when I was
Yeah.
bored too going into the season, like, oh boy, here we
Oh
go.
yeah, I think I
Gonna be
started.
struggling
I think I
because
lost my first two games this season, so like, I was having that feeling as well as like you said, like when you were board one, I was like, oh man, I'm just dropping my game every time, even though I was kind of confident coming into the season. But you get the spectrum, like the 2,000 mark is for me, like that's where I'm at in rapid. I hover in the 1900s, and then I've peaked at like
Mhm.
2004 a few times now. Um, but it's yeah, that 2000 to 2150 is a huge. It can be a huge difference depending on
Well,
the
and I think
player.
when you get higher ratings anyway, there's when you're lower ratings, you can win a lot of games with the very like narrow but good ideas. Like either you're
Sure.
really good with your tactics, or you have really good like general opening ideas or things. You can it can carry you a long way. When you get higher rated though, it's like, well, everyone's pretty good at this
Yeah,
and
exactly.
everyone's pretty good. So it's like what the way to beat people is a lot more about consistency, not just, oh, hey, I'm really good at tactics and whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, but most of the opponents you face are like that way too. It's why they're that rating.
Yeah.
So it's like, what else you got to bring to the table, you know? So
Yeah. No.
and for me, I know openings, that's where I get struggled, where I usually will get in a bad position out of the gate, and then the rest of the game I'm like fighting to stay into it type thing a
Yeah.
lot of the times. This game, however, was a different one because you didn't even play E4, so we didn't even get
Yes.
to see the French.
Right.
So I had to come up with something kind of on the fly, which is
Yeah.
fine for me in a way. Outside of like, okay, I'm either going to get out prepped and he has something, whatever, but he probably didn't have an idea of what I was going to play as a response because, you know, F5 such a, or F3 is, I mean, anything you can respond with D5,
Yeah. It's
C5,
pretty wide open for
I
black.
mean,
Black can respond
yeah, so it's kind of
multitude of
like as
ways.
long as you know you're struggling, it's really more of a system at that point. And I thought, at
Yes.
least initially, I thought you're playing a King's Indian attack. So then when you didn't show your bishop, I'm like, okay, well, it's not really a King's Indian attack then. It's, you know, some other, what I don't even know what the
Yeah.
structure was
So
that you
I'll
played.
lead into kind of like my preparation going into the week. I did. Obviously, you have thousands of games on your account when I looked, and most of the time, if I see someone like respond, if I play 1e4 and they like consistently play the Carl Khan, all right, I'll take a deep dive into like opening preparation, and
Yeah.
I'll like have whatever a couple lines because I can reliably. It doesn't always happen, but I mean, I would say like you have a 90 to 95% chance of heading down, let's say a Carl Khan line, but you just had such a wide range of openings, and when I looked, you had played a lot of different responses to e4. Um, Pretty recently. That's another thing I think some people like make sure when you're looking at your opponent's games, you see when they actually played. Some people have played like the Sicilian for 5 years, then they switched to E4, E5 like in the last 5 years. So you got to really look to make sure if your opponent's even playing that. But so yeah,
Yeah.
when I saw your opening tree database, I was like, oh, this is way too much kind of stuff to study or try to prepare for. It looks like you do play the French. I wasn't as confident going into it. I saw my stats on the French and I was like, all right, maybe I shouldn't do that. And then I've been really enjoying. So I mean, I watch a lot of just chess YouTube in bed and stuff like that. And the chess bras, Amon Hamilton's been doing a lot of these like they call them speedrun courses, but they're I mean just like an opening courses where they start at 400 elo and then usually every one video is like 100 rating. So he came out with what they called there's a Philidor video from the black side, and then as the white, he was playing a Philidor like setup, and it is kind of like a system. And it was something that I thought I could play, and the ideas were very similar. After I watched like 10 or 11 of these videos, and I was like, okay, the setup doesn't change too drastically depending on what black plays. Like the first 5 to 6, 7 moves are pretty straightforward. And then
Yeah.
the nice thing was he left. I mean, after a lot of the games, he goes over them, but he leaves you with middle game ideas. I think that's sometimes my struggle, and I'm sure other people struggle with it. They do like all this opening prep, and then they've never seen that middle game before. And then, like, kind of like you said, like you're on your own. So, like, either you got to be like a good player to find the right moves going forward, or hopefully, whatever videos you watched or chessable courses that you guys use, they leave you with like middle game ideas and kind of how to go tackle that position, especially with a new opening. Like if
Yeah, because that's what I think a lot of, especially when you're lower rated, they do a lot of opening prep, but they get that situation all the time. As soon as their opponent leaves the theory, they're like,
Yeah.
okay, this is good, but I don't know why. So it's
Yes.
like, great, you got a good position, but you have no idea what to do after that.
Right.
So then 3 moves later, you just throw it all away.
Right. You
That's your
crumble.
opening advantage gone.
Yes.
And I think that's as they get better, you're better at taking a position and working with it because
Right.
you know more chess knowledge to
Yeah.
like,
S-
okay, so this is what I have going for me. This is what I need to be doing. Like a better idea
It's
when
still
you're lower
difficult,
rated.
but you
That's where like
realize, or you realize more quickly, like, oh
yeah,
man, I
or
don't know what I'm
at
doing
least when
here.
you
This.
play games, like you can play a couple blitz games and go, okay, this idea doesn't work. I need to come up with something else. Or you look at a couple master games in the position, you're like,
Yeah.
okay, they're going for this idea. I'm probably not going to get that exact idea executed, but at least I know I'm trying to get this piece on this square. I'm trying to
Yeah.
whatever. So that gives you some way of like navigating through the middle game. I think that for me, that's one of the things I hate about opening prep. I hate how kind of like rigid it was going in the game where I'm more of like, oh, I think I want to play this type of setup. It's like, well, this is what you're supposed to play. It's like, I just don't feel like playing that though, like,
I gotcha.
and so it's always hard for me to.
All right.
But this
So
game was different
I
because it
played.
got more of how I usually play because
Okay. So
you
you felt
didn't play
comfortable.
E4. I didn't get to play a friend, so I'm like, okay, I get to think on my own, but it's the same way that's kind of normal.
Is
Um,
okay. So let's dive in then. So I played knight f3, and I see a lot of people normally go, let's say d5 is I think a pretty common move. I mean
mhm.
g7 or g6 is also available. I mean, what made you choose e6? Do you play sometimes like the Queen's Gambit or stuff like that?
I was not sure exactly what type of setup you were going to do,
Okay.
so I played E6 because I figured if you then decided, hey, I'm going to play E4 because you didn't play D, see what you
Yep.
were going to play. Once you play D3, then I'm like, okay, we're going to get some sort of like system thing going on here
Yes.
because you're not taking the center right away. Clearly, you have other ideas, like what you wanted to play this game. It's not your normal setup
Exactly.
from the history that I was told that you had
Yeah, no,
with
this is
E4 and
completely
everything.
new. I actually hadn't played any practice games, funny enough. I just been watching YouTube videos, but
Just put it on the board. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
so this
So
is
then I switched
kind of
to
the idea
playing
here.
that.
So this is kind of like a Philidor setup for white from the except for just colors reversed. The idea is that we're trying to
Yeah.
support the e4 push, and when we do that, we don't want to trade pawns and trade queens. We want to just keep more pieces on the board.
Yeah, but see, that's why I thought you were playing a King's Indian attack because I use this setup a lot to get to the King's Indian attack.
Okay.
I don't play often a queen, a pawn G3. I usually play this setup, then I play E4, and for that same reason, I don't want to trade queens, so I play this type of setup first. Also, I like to see if my opponent how their pawn structure is going to open before I kind of reveal how I want to open my pawn structure because there's certain structures when you play the King's Indian attack that move order matters.
Okay.
And so I'm like, hey, I don't want to give away my pawn structure initially because I don't want them to go, oh, they're playing this setup. I'm going to go here, and this is like
Right.
the
Right.
way I either play against it or I've heard is the best way to play.
Yes.
So that's why you're playing a little more coy. So that's what I kind of assumed that you were doing. I'm like, okay, he's playing the King's attack, he's going reverse, and that's why I played B6 because I'm like, he's going to be playing E4 eventually, so we're going to fight on the E4 square at some point.
So there was a
I'm
lot
just
of
going to put my
tension
bishop
on
there.
e4 for most of this middle
Yeah,
game
and
was
so I'm
huge
like,
tension.
and from my understanding, with playing the King's Day attack years ago, when I used to play a lot more regularly, I knew certain moves were more difficult, or at least were less familiar. So I figured, hey, if he doesn't usually play a King's Indian attack, then me playing an early Fian Shadow Bishop on the light square here is going to probably throw him off because you don't often see this type of setup as a King's Indian attack. Like it's not you're going to be like, oh, people do this all the time. It's an
And
offbeat type
I
of setup.
will agree. Like I said, I'd watched. They had up until funny enough, like the videos that were released by the time that we had played was up until 1200 rating on I think chess.com. It was like 12 or 1300.
Yeah.
Usually they go up to like 2000 or whatever. Um,
Hmm.
but there wasn't a lot of games in this position. So like once you played B6, it did kind of like throw me off a little bit. I knew I was still fine, but some of the middle game
Yeah.
ideas that I had, which I think the computer still likes the middle game ideas, I didn't end up going with. Usually it's like a queen side pawn storm, or
Yeah.
you try to expand on the queen side. I didn't end up going for that this game because I was like, oh man, it's like I don't know, this structure felt a little solid on your queen side and I didn't know if that would kind of work. So this did throw me off kind of right out of the opening, but I just kind of held on to my guns. Like
Well,
I
and that's
knew
the nice thing about the system, like with white here, is you don't there's not a lot that really can go wrong quickly, even when your
exactly.
opponent's throwing you off. It's more of a middle game issue where, like you were just saying, okay, the typical ideas I've seen in this opening aren't probably going to work necessarily in this setup. I'm going to have to think of something else.
Right.
But you're not like, oh, I just dropped a pawn, or oh,
Exactly. Exactly.
it's very rare for you to get that. That's the nice part. One of the reasons why I played like the King's Indian attack years ago was I basically get always a playable position as white,
Yeah.
even if it was an equal position, it's playable. And I was generally more familiar with the middle game ideas of the positions where I felt like, well, I'm probably going to be on equal footing than my opponent, or
Yeah.
more or
Yeah. Yeah.
better
Yeah. You can
on
just
my
play
opponents.
chess
Even
at
if it
that
was
point.
like, okay, I didn't see this, but okay, it's a playable position. It's not like, I'm getting blown off the
Right.
board here. What am I doing?
Yeah, like you say, plus point two. Like, all right, that's we're playing chess. Like that's, at this point,
Yeah, and
like
even
no
in
one's
this
got a huge
position, I still,
advantage.
like I said, this is a typical King Indian septimi. You just haven't played G3
Yes.
and fianchetto. I think, okay, he's just delaying it, which is fine, but it really wasn't until a few moves later where I was like, oh, wait,
Yeah, we're
we're
somewhere
not going to
completely
play
different.
this. Yeah, this
Yeah.
is not going to be a King's Indian. This is going to be something a little, I mean,
Yeah.
similar, but it's not a King's Indian.
Yeah. So for anybody that's wondering, this C3 move is really nice in multiple different setups. Usually, Black has a knight on C6. We're really clamping down on D4, B4. There's going to be no knight jumps. If Black ever takes on E4, we want to take back with the pawn. We have a really strong pawn on E4. White, in most games, does not want to be the one taking on D5. So you'll kind of see this tension between the pawns. And a lot of the speedrun videos, because it was a little bit on the lower elo side, Black did take a lot of the times. And as we'll kind of see here, the queen comes to C2 to get out of this any sort of queen trades, and it helps support that E4 pawn if shenanigans start happening. So you expanded
Yeah.
right away
Oh,
here
and
with
funny animator Jim, that's exactly why I didn't play knight f6. So you don't like to play knight f6 in this position because white basically gets a free move with e5. So the only way to play knight f6 early on is if you think you can quickly overwhelm the pawn. But because of his setup with his other pawns, he would be able to play d4, and then we're going to get this weird French, possibly advanced structure
yeah, it does
where
look like it.
pieces aren't where they need to be. The light squared bishop for black is junk. It's not a position that I was going to walk into because it's again I'm planning he's going to do a King's Indian attack, and e5 is a normal for King's Indian attack. That's kind of like where you want the pawn to be, blocking, kind of dividing the pawns, the sides of the board, and then you attack the king side. So I wasn't going to play knight f3 because I was again assuming I'm playing the King's Indian attack. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to basically bait him to play e5 right away with
Yep.
the tempo. Like that's
And right
so.
now, the engine does say E5 is technically the best move to kind of like transpose into that
Yeah,
sort of
just
structure.
thematic, right? In that type of
Um,
structure, yeah.
yeah, like I said, I was literally just going off Amon Hamilton. He kind of kept this pawn here, so I didn't have a lot of games to go off of when to push E5 or when to like leave the pawn on E4. So here I
Hmm.
just like kind of continued with the setup, getting pieces developed. Queen, like I said, along C2. And here you went with knight to d7. Seems fine. I guess you just want to leave the light squared bishop staring at e4, and then black can jump into e5 yourself or just other stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of a flexible move. It's also I don't want to block my light squared bishop yet, right? I'm trying to keep the tension on e5. I want to make sure, depending if you capture on d4, I don't want to get in a situation where my knight basically gets kind of stuck
Yep,
on c6.
exactly.
And it takes away any queen checks later down the road, which doesn't matter right now. But when you play bishop e2, that's when I know, hey, we're not playing the King's Indian attack anymore. This is
Yes,
something different. So.
yes. So this is kind of the
But the knight moved
this.
here because I won my rook over here. So if you had a check, you could try to maybe pick off the pawn on a7, not right away, but down the
Okay,
line
you're talking like
possibly.
checks along
Hmm.
early.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so I just yeah, so it's like the knight just kind of gets rid of any of those type of checks, and it's kind of a flexible move because again, I don't know if I want to play e5 later down the line myself.
Yes.
At certain lines, it might make sense, but generally like in this position with the match standings at the moment was all I needed was a draw to win the match. So I was mostly focused on don't lose the game, not necessarily go for a win.
Okay.
So I wasn't going to be trying to take risks without any real reason. Like it's like if hey, if I can play something kind of more quiet and solid, I should probably stick to that because I had just come
Gotcha.
off 2 losses previously. So
Gotcha.
it
Okay.
was
Okay.
more reason to be like, hey, try not
Reset the
losing
mental
games
here.
here.
Yep, I gotcha. So obviously that I mean you've developed your entire queen side for the most part, besides the queen, but the queen's doing its own thing. And at this point, what did you play here? Bishop. Okay. Yeah, I kind of thought like your king's at least 2 moves away from castling, and here do we have the move times on here? Or actually, I can just kind of see after I. Yes, I mean I spent 6 minutes here. There was so many times. I mean I spent I think like 20 minutes on a move. I don't think it was this one, but it might have been one coming up where I was this pawn capture on d5, like e takes d5, and then I was trying to like calculate both bishop takes and pawn takes. I was surprised. I went back and like watched your like tab through your video on your Twitch channel. And I was surprised
Hmm.
how quickly like you were like, all right, if he takes, I'm taking back with the pawn right away. I was like, didn't even like question taking back
Yeah,
with the bishop, and I was like, I was trying to like look at both of those lines like going forward, and you were just like, oh yeah, just pawn takes. I was like, I that seems kind of a little bit risky, a little bit. Your king was still in the middle, I think. So I think it might have been here, or no, you played like f6. Yeah. After this is
yeah, I
where
was
I took
after.
like yeah, I took almost 20 minutes on this, but we can go back a little bit. But yeah, I was expecting you to castle. I think if I had to guess your move here, and maybe you can explain a little bit, maybe why f6 jumped out to you, or what you were kind of worried about here, the situation.
1 second here. I think I got a little bit of a delay on the audio here.
Oh, okay. Let me know if
Yeah, and just let me get a. I think I don't know if it's my computer. Just what?
refresh the
Okay, I
YouTube
think it
page.
caught up.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just hold on a second.
Here,
I'm gonna
refresh.
pause. I'm gonna pause your stream. I think I might be overloading. Maybe that's why. I mean, it's on
Gotcha.
mute, but still, I
Yeah,
think just
or put
just
me
trying
down
to
to
keep
like
up with everything.
360p or something like that. Low quality.
Yeah, there we go. Now I can hear it fine. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
So and actually f6. The only reason why I played f6 here is
Yeah.
I was at this moment I was like, you know what? I just don't want him playing e5 at this moment because I have my bishop on a nice diagonal, and so that was the main reason for why I played f6. Normally I would have castled, but I was
Wow.
like, you know, if I don't let him get e5 in this position, I think he's going to have a real hard time getting any activity because again, to me, you're in a must-win game, not me. So I'm kind of
Gotcha.
like, hey, if I can just keep shutting the obvious ideas down, that's gonna
Yeah.
kind of make it work. You work
I feel
harder
like
to
this
come
makes
up
it
with tactics.
crazier, to be honest. Like I feel like I'm more inclined to go for tactics now, but I'll be honest with you, like I play in the 45-45 league. I'm not always checking to see what the team scores are. I like this the classical game format. So I know some people are very into like, oh, our team needs X amount. I just like
Hmm.
that they do a good job of catching cheaters or making sure like it's fairly competitive online, longer classical games. So in my head, most of the time I go for the win if possible. Obviously, we ended up
You're
taking
just
a
playing the
draw.
board
Yeah,
smash, not
playing
worried
playing.
about the.
Yeah, exactly. I thought this move was like, and that's why I spent 20 minutes on it. And I mean, the engine kind of it flipped from minus point four to like plus point four, so maybe a pawn differential. I just thought so many tactics kind of possibly opened up here, and it still says the computer says I can still push e4. That's or d4. That's the top move. Or no, d4. So I did look at that. I looked at
Yeah,
d4,
d4 is the idea.
and
Yeah.
then I also looked at. So I looked at this pawn takes, and then here's where I was like spending so much this move especially because I was like, all right, he has pawn takes. He's not going to do knight takes because that just drops the pawn with check, and so I could rule that out. And then bishop takes, and I thought bishop takes there was some possible interesting stuff where I was checking to see if like c4 was good, d4 after that, like knight to c4. And I know you initially said pretty much pawn takes because you didn't want my knight to get free from d2, pretty much like knight to get into
Right. Yeah.
like
Right.
really
That's one
wanted
of
to
the main
like
reasons we picked them.
dissuade that. But I just thought all of a sudden like you're gonna have massive possible light square if this light square diagonal ever opens up here, like after you castle, my rook's staring down. I felt, and I just couldn't see the lines. Like obviously the computer says there's really nothing crazy there. Like it's just a good playable position for white. You're plus zero point 0.5 or zero point 0.4 or whatever. But
Yeah.
it just seemed like it started getting a little crazy. Like if your bishop took, I wanted to be able to move my knight, but then I was looking at ideas where you take my knight on f3, and all of a sudden I have like a wide open king here along the g file, and maybe your pieces are like both your knights are kind of in positions to start flooding over to the king side if things kind of
Right.
open
Yeah.
up. Like if the g file opens up, and then maybe you don't even castle. Maybe somehow you're just I don't know. Like maybe we get this crazy game where your king's just stuck in the middle, or you're castling by hand, or it's just stepping off the e file or something like that. But I just couldn't see the craziness, and that's originally why I went for h4. And I think this was
Yeah, I was a little surprised by h4. I thought you were just calculating um, pawn takes d5 and
I
call
was.
plays.
I was. Yeah, that was about
And
that
you
was the
were,
20
yeah.
minutes,
That's
and then I was
so
like, all right,
yeah,
I'm firing H4. I was just like, all right,
yeah.
I can't
So
see
when you
it.
played h4, I'm kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Like that, I was not expecting
Yep.
that. I figured you're just gonna take on d4 or d5 here, and I was like, okay, we're gonna get an open e file. I'm gonna have to castle. We'll fight on the e file for a little bit, possibly.
Yeah.
D4 might be in the works, but I wasn't too worried about d4 if I recall in the positions much. But either way, it was like I'm not worried about my king necessarily. I think we just get a game. And
Yes.
for me, again, I'm playing just not to lose.
Okay.
And I figured, well, I don't see he's going to generate an attack. Then he went h4. I'm like, oh, he's going to keep the tension on the board. Like, I guess that makes sense
Yeah.
because
Just
he's
waiting
playing for a
like knight
win.
to
So
come into G6.
yeah, and just
Wanted to jump
right, and just
early.
saying, I'm
Like
going to play
that's
this and say I'm going to make black make a move. I don't want to just trade off the tension and
exactly.
pieces at the moment. I'll just
It's funny
play an
the
h4 and say, are you going to castle? Are you going to
yeah. You're gonna castle into the pawn running. Obviously, it's not
yeah.
the best move. It kind of gives that pawn advantage that you had given me back. It gives it back to you. There's the third top move, so it's either d4, pawn takes on d5. Those are both about half a pawn advantage for white. Then this other idea of a4, which so originally a lot of the like I talked about earlier, a lot of the ideas are queenside oriented. It just
Hmm.
felt like this game was like such like with structures like this. It felt like the middle and the king side was actually where the action was going to be as the game developed. But I kind of see so the third move on the engine is a4, and it's pretty much even plus zero point 0.1. And I see it looks like we're probably a4, a5. Maybe we try to activate our a rook as white. Maybe we can get it to
Yes.
a7 or something like that. So I think I did briefly look at some queenside play. I just felt like uh, your pieces were just in a
Yeah, there were
they were
some lines, and I met it came up a little later in this position, but eventually I had the idea of the bishop going on b8. So I have the bishop on b8 and b7 to hold the a7 pawn down and kind of lock down the queen side.
okay.
Because I thought you were probably going to try some queen side stuff at a moment.
Yes.
When you played h4, I was like, oh, he's looking at king side attack. And then, I mean, I didn't have to probably castle, but I was kind of like, if I don't castle, it's one of those positions where you're going to wish you did, and then you do castle, and you're like, I castled right into an attack. But I was like, I'm going to castle in this position um, rather than not. And again, I'm not going to take on the e4 square at this moment because then that leaves the e6 square a little bit weird, and I either have to block in my dark squared bishop with e5 later on, which would be terrible, I think.
Yep.
At least in my mind. I mean, otherwise, if I'm playing e5, I don't need to be playing um, f6. So since I played f6, it doesn't make any sense then to play e5 because then I just weaken pawn structure for no reason. I'm weakening
Right.
on these light squares and blocking my dark square bishop for nothing. If I was going to block it, I would have just left the pawn on f6, played e5, and left it at that.
Yep.
just
Yep.
you know,
And I don't know if you ended up listening to my stream back afterwards, but now,
yes, I did.
okay, so like 4 or 5 moves later, like kind of from this position, I like I saw it kind of think after either h4, h5. I was like, oh, g3, like, and then just get the bishop to h3, and then maybe we
Yes,
have like
I
a
thought you were
lot
going
of
to do that
tension
at some point.
here, and it felt like it was. I mean, I kind of end up doing that a little bit, so I'll play a few moves on the board. You end up castling into this, and at this position, like I could play g3. It's about 0.5 for black, but I really felt like I could have probably kept my pawn structure a little bit more solid here and played like h3. It's a completely even according to the engine, and then bishop to h3, and really put some pressure on this like e6 pawn, which is a little awkward looking when it comes down to it. I
Right.
thought this would have been, even though it's whatever the computer says, I thought this would have been a little bit more challenging. Maybe I know you had seen it, or you kind of like mentioned it offhand at
Yeah,
one point.
yeah. I thought you were going to eventually do something because I didn't know how else you're going to get your light squared bishop kind of into the game. So I figured either you're going to be playing d4 at some point, or you're going to do something like that with g3. And again, if you play g3, you can still morph this into a King's Indian attack
Yeah.
type
Yep.
setup. So, and when you played h4, you could even still get in a King's Indian attack setup
Yeah.
with
We could have
g3,
gone here and
knight h2 possibly, transfer the other knights or the bishop to h3, and that allows your knight to go to f1 to e3 or something like that. So there's
or,
still ways, yeah.
or
But
even
what
into
you don't
e3
have
or
right
whatever.
now is the pawn on e5. So again, I was like, well, I think I still have some sort of a little accomplishment in terms of against this type of structure because I still haven't allowed e5 to get played for white like
Yeah.
we at the moment. So,
And
but yeah, h4 to me, I think g3 before h4 with bishop to h3 would have been
more
more
solid at
annoying to deal
least.
with.
Because you end
Yeah,
up getting
and
a
it's less
huge
committal, right?
counterplay
So
here.
you
Yeah,
can,
like once I threw h4 down the board, I was like, I might be getting checkmated here, or maybe it works. But and as we can see, the evaluation bar at the bottom, or I should say, like the graph, this is where you end up getting one of your biggest advantages of the game over these next few minutes here. Where are we at? Yeah, so it ends up
right.
morphing into almost, I think, like a pawn and a half advantage. So I just kept firing down the board. I know time still wants me to like resolve this middle tension. I think I was just like too cooked with my brain. I was like, I don't know what I should be doing in the middle. I know at least I can
Right.
recapture. Like if he ends up capturing or
Yeah,
something
and
like
that's
that, I
what
was
I was
like,
going
I
through. When
can
you
at least.
don't, if you don't see it, it's hard for you to change the whole structure in the middle, right? You're kind of like leave it as it is for now because I don't see a way forward changing it up. And then if you change it up and it goes sideways, you're like, well,
Yeah,
that was dumb. I should
exactly.
just, I. And so yeah, it's one of those. It's hard, type thing. See what's funny, and where Jim said, if EXD4 then D4 blocking
Yeah, he's saying against
Black's life
white.
squared
Like,
bishop.
yeah, and I did
Yeah,
see some of that, Jim. I did see that kind of takes and or kind of obviously queen can't has to move beforehand, but pushing this d4 pawn to try to block your bishop, your pawn takes back. But I and
yeah,
originally,
and I think in that position, I had looked at pawn takes d4. Your knight has to take because that's why I put my rook on the c8 square.
right.
And then I believe I was playing to play knight c6 or something in that position later to again challenge the d4 square, and we would have a bunch of trading off.
Yeah,
And
yep,
that's one of the ideas I thought could happen. But if you weren't going to take on d5 or play d4, I wasn't going to like leave it be. But that was kind of the general idea of
yep,
if
makes
that
sense.
happened, I was looking at stuff like that. But once
Originally,
you played h4 again, I was like, I don't think he's going to break in the center
yeah, at
because
least
he's
not
obviously going to try to
soon.
break in the wing.
Yeah, and
You know,
originally I was like, all right, after you castled, I was like, okay, well now. Originally, I thought maybe it'd be worth it almost not to. Obviously, castling's top move, but I was like, oh, okay, maybe he tries to leave the rook on the H
yeah, again, it's
file,
just
like,
one of those
and
questions where you're
then
like, do I leave it or do I castle? And I'm like, well, you know what? If I castle now and it goes sideways, I'll be like, oh man. But if I don't, I'm gonna be like, well, was I doing? I should have
yeah,
done that. Like
yeah,
it's in
and
the
I
center because you
know
still can take EXD. So I'm like, the king really
exactly.
can't stick around the E file.
It is kind of tough, but
If
yeah,
you didn't have the pawn break, if it was locked in the center, I definitely wouldn't have castled. I'd be like, yep, just keep the king in the center. I don't care. I'm not going to castle. But with the idea that the center can get open, I'm like, nah, it's castling's better than not, probably.
yes. So I kept launching, and this is kind of where it starts to take a little bit of a downhill turn. Obviously, your queen comes over to attack the pawn. I don't have any good defenders of the pawn right now. And at this point, I just wanted to see if you would see if we could. And the top move is
Yeah.
g5, which I
My
know one of
teammate Susie Dent was saying G5, and I
yes,
probably would have played G5 in some other ideas, but I thought opening the G file was actually going to benefit me, so I didn't want to keep it closed. Otherwise, I would have played G5, but I thought, hey, if I
yeah,
can open the G file, I think I'm faster than white. So when I have it
At this
open, get my
point,
queen, my rook over.
I had seen, I think I had talked about like this bishop h3 move a little bit on my stream at this point, right here, and so
Hmm.
I didn't think you had anything down the g file because I could still play g3 and bishop g2, which is what I end up playing in the game here,
Yeah,
and I just didn't think you were gonna have. I wasn't worried more about the g file, like it kind of blocks up sort of some checkmates, um, on h2. But it's interesting to hear that you thought the G file opening up would be beneficial to you, which part of the reason I think is why G4 or G5 gets played. My knights around, but yeah, I actually, funny enough, I wasn't worried about the G file opening up. So it's interesting to hear both sides of that kind of ideas. I was like, all right,
yeah,
maybe my dark square
yeah.
bishop gets in the play here. Maybe I don't know. Maybe like this pawn gets weak as well on f6. Maybe h7, h6 is weak if you had taken like that. So
Right.
you bring the queen out, which makes total sense. I end up taking. Again, like I said, I kind of calculated, quote unquote, calculated. Obviously, rook up. Rook going to take the pawn. I'm going to have enough time to kind of tuck my bishop here onto G. Whether that's good or
Right.
not,
Yeah.
we can. Obviously, the computer says black is love and life a little bit, or at least starting to build
Yeah,
up
well, I think
an
I
advantage.
think my pieces have more. I can get more active right now,
Yeah.
but
Oh, this was the
everything is
difficulty, man.
too
Like
slow,
my
and I
my.
think that's where your pieces. I mean, you have time to defend, so it's not a
Yeah.
huge advantage because there's no immediate like killer strike, right? I
Yeah.
don't have enough pieces organized yet. If I can get rid of some of my pawns, like my F pawn, for example, hey, we got some
Yes.
things to play around with, but I got to get rid of the G pawn first, and everything is just takes a move or two too slow to
Yes.
me.
And
It was.
yeah, like and at this point, I was spending a good chunk of time or just trying to, like I said, a lot of the ideas that I'd seen was a lot of queenside play. So your rook on a1 is getting action, like, and then usually this knight is like getting into c4 or other squares. So at this point, I was like, man, like, how do I even, how do I even activate? I have two pieces that are doing absolute nothing on my queen half of the board. It looks like all of your pieces are about to get active here. And so I had this idea, obviously bishop into g2, and then trying to get this knight, like you said, to f1, and then either
Yeah,
h2 or even e3 if that was seemed good. So
yeah, because and it's not even so much the knight getting active, so much as just letting your other bishop get active,
exactly,
right? Like just get the knight
exactly.
out of the way. Like,
And then here you played knight to g6. So funny enough, you did mention, like, I don't know if this sack works. I had
yeah,
I think I noticed it after I kind of played bishop to g2. I think I mentioned it offhand, but then I thought the tactics didn't work. So it's funny that I guess technically, I mean, it's not a crushing tactic. It's still giving a -1 to -1.2 computer
yeah.
evaluation, but I think it just rips open all the pawns, or just pretty much it rips open my king, and
See, and this
it would
goes
have
back
been
to the match
crazy.
situation.
Okay,
If this was just a normal game, I would have done the sack.
okay,
But because in this position, I was more of like focusing on I don't want to lose because then the team wins the match. I'm like, well, I could play this and it might work, but if it doesn't, I'm going to look back and go, why did I risk that? There's no reason to risk it, right? Like I can still get an attack. It's slower, but like I'm not being under attack. Everything's still good, you know?
okay.
So yeah, it
And
was one of
funny
those
enough, you
ideas
had
where I
looked
thought,
at
yeah, I probably could do
and
something like this, but it really wasn't clear to me. I'm like, why am I risking this in this
yes,
position? I'm like,
okay.
nah, I'm just not going to do it.
And then I think, like I said, funny enough, I think you were looking at the rook sack instead of the bishop sack at first when I
Yes,
went
because
and
I thought the
listened.
dark squared your dark squared bishop was out of commission, so I was looking
Okay,
at the dark
okay.
squared bishop instead.
Yeah,
Because I
rook sack
also thought
is
that I
not it
can
for anybody
get the
that's
material back on e1, possibly, in this type of position here. Like you can't move your knight here because then you would drop the rook on there. And I thought that's a quick way to be like kind of like a bailout. Hey, your king's still under pressure, but there's
yeah.
still not. I mean, you still have a bit of material, obviously, but in this position again, my king is on the wrong square.
Yeah, your
So
rook
I
wants to
felt
get
like,
here. It gives me
yeah, so I'm
time to
like,
get
okay,
my queen
maybe it's
involved.
okay for
Maybe
me.
my bishop's
Yeah,
involved.
exactly. But your pieces are going to get active. And again, why am I risking a position like this, like in this
Yeah, this is
scenario? Like
kind
I
of some
just didn't,
craziness.
yeah, like I just
Um,
wasn't, it wasn't a position I was going into. Like,
that's with the rook
of
sack.
course, the engines might say, oh, it's fine. You're going to
Yep.
get pressure.
Rook
White
sack,
can't
it says
activate the
white
A1
is
rook.
better,
I don't
but
know.
bishop sack, it says black's better.
Yeah.
So, I mean, hey, you were playing with how you felt, and nothing wrong with that. So at this point, knight to g6. I mean, just bringing another piece into the game seems totally plausible. Or it
Well, at this
wanted.
point, I was trying to get the knight on e5. So I thought we would trade off knights because I
Okay,
knew the knights had to go away if I was going to continue the attack.
we're looking at that. The computer says obviously the sack, but if you don't do the sack, then just sidestepping and allowing your rooks to double up. I assume
mm,
here on the g
yep,
file.
which is another idea I was looking at.
Yeah.
I just
Funny enough, it wants queen f7. That's the third move. I don't know. I don't understand that
Queen
one.
f7, I think, is just kind of a. It's more of. I think is more of a reset position. Like
Okay.
bring your pieces back. Everything. That we're not going to focus on an attack. Maybe we're going to switch to more of a center type thing right now.
Okay.
The F
Makes
file
sense.
might be a play. I think
Sure.
is what it's going at with that. But usually when you get down the tree of the engines, they're almost like, hey, here's a move that could be played that's not losing. Where it's like it
True.
doesn't make any strategic sense. It's just like
But this
the safe
defensive check
move.
that happens 15 moves down the line that
Yeah, like whatever.
well,
Wasn't.
and
It's
also
not
like
a.
now your
Yeah.
queen's a little blocked in too, so like all of a sudden like if your
Oh
queen
yeah,
gets
when I
under
played, that was
fire,
one of the things I was like, man, do I not get my queen trapped? Like I was a little,
yes.
yeah, I had to make sure I
So at this point
hold on into the
I was
front.
feeling at least comfortable. I was like, all right, my plan kind of worked a little bit. I got my dark square bishops on all of a sudden like free.
Yeah,
My knight is gonna either reroute to h2, maybe d4 is gonna be cooking at some point. I don't know. Like I mean, obviously not, but yeah, or maybe the knight gets to g4. So I was feeling okay in this position. My queen now all of a sudden has access to e2, which we'll see here in a little bit. And you jump in, and at this point, I end up taking. It does want either queen to d1. I assume queen d1 is the idea is probably just get a queen trade, something like that. Once queens came off the board, I was feeling really good. We'll get to that position in a sec.
yeah, I didn't see that or realize too, but then I was like, okay, we're heading to an end game. We're going to go
Yeah,
in a
so
minor piece battle.
topsy moves are just getting the queen more closer to the other side of the board, which originally, so after I took here, which is third move on the engine, I was super surprised you took with the pawn, if I'm being honest. And I think you spent like 3 minutes here. I thought this pawn capture was like I breathed easy, I should say. That maybe that in that sense, I was like, okay. I mean, this f pawn on f2 is
Right.
like never gonna be a huge liability. I
Yeah,
still have a dark square
it's more of
bishop,
controlling f4.
and if we
That was the
get
main reason
like,
why I didn't play it.
I'm just gonna make a random move
And
here.
I'm
Like,
not sure. And also, I think because
I was like,
I wasn't looking for the
I was like,
queen trade.
okay, okay.
So I was still playing for an attack, but once you
Well, I thought I
offer
could
the queen
blockade
trade, then it's like
these
now the
pawns.
pawn doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, I thought these pawns were just gonna get blockaded. So like I didn't. At this point, I was like, all right, well, I'm not gonna release the tension here on d5 like ever, because
Yeah,
let's just say play like I mean, if you ever take and I just blockade, like these pawns are just gonna get picked up. I assume they're just gonna get eaten up at for me at some point, or they just become super weak. So that's yeah, I thought if the structure ever changed and I was able to keep a pawn on e4, or like even if you push here and somehow we trade, I was like, all right, these pawns are playing a random a3, get those kind of positions. But yeah, and I just thought your dark square bishop all of a sudden is like looking really awkward on d6 personally. So that was a little bit of what was going through my head at this point. I kind of took a sigh of relief. I was looking at both like bishop takes and knight takes with ideas of
right.
like knight getting into
Yeah, I felt like you were going to be
f3
playing
or like
f4. So my idea was I'm going to stop
oh
him from playing f4, open up the f file
yeah
as well for my other rook and stuff like that. But as soon as you played queen e2, I'm like, oh well, now if the queens come off the board, there's no attack. Now taking with the
yeah
e pawn is ruining the end game essentially for me, which is where we're headed.
yeah.
So
I thought I was not even
yeah,
thinking about f4 because I thought And this pawn on g3 is just super liability if I ever push f4. I don't necessarily have my rook on f1 still, so me opening up the f file for any reason seems like a bad idea. I think I was gonna. There was some like some tactics here. I forget if it was like knight takes. I was thinking of possibly I think bishop to f4 or something like that.
Yeah, there was ideas with bishop 4 and
There
like
was some like
d4 stuff eventually.
crazy like yeah, there's some crazy tactics like with check and then your queen getting in here. I don't know the 100% like remember what I was thinking 100%, but yeah, at this point I was like, okay, if the queens come off, all of a sudden that's what happens here. So queen takes, rook takes. Black's queen is funny enough trapped if he doesn't take the queen. All these squares
Right.
are covered, and we have
Yeah,
the
there's no
other
choice
squares.
but to trade queens there. That's why
Exactly.
you played queen e2. But at the same time, I go, well, now his only winning chances are grinding in an endgame. So it wasn't the end
Yeah.
of the world for me getting the queens
Oh,
off
of
the
course.
board. It was
Yeah.
just
You knew
kind
it's
of
probably even
the
at
end
this
of
point.
me winning. It was more of like, okay, now I just got to keep it equal because again, my pawn structure is a little whacked out because I took on the f takes e. So it was one of those where I don't think I'm going to necessarily win. It's more of a okay, but am I going to lose here? Because if I'm
Yeah.
not losing, I'm okay. Like that was my kind of
Yeah.
my idea.
So for Jim's question, how would the pawns get taken? I don't know, but eventually, I assume you're talking about like the double D pawns. Like eventually, if these rooks get active, I don't know, a couple more pieces come off. My bishops do have access to kind of harass the backside of the pawns. So I just thought that as more and more pieces come off, it'd be a little bit more difficult for you to hold on to these
I'm
pawns
not
at
even
some
sure
point.
if even if they're necessary to win though. It's not so much of winning the pawn so much as you're going to tie down black
Right,
defending
one
them.
pawn for
So that's
yeah,
where the advantage is. It's more of just it's very easy to put a couple pieces against one or more of those pawns and lock down black's activity because
that's
now
true.
all of his pieces are basically focused on defending the pawns while you still have the idea to shift to anywhere else you want. Also, I have a really weak H pawn.
Yep.
So if you start taking pieces off the board and start thinking more of a
Yeah.
king and pawn endgame,
It wants you to
black
fire
is
h5 here,
always
by
going
the way. That's the top move.
yeah, because again, it's weak. It's saying
Yeah, just trade it
get that
off.
off the board.
That's
Like
true.
just trade it off now. Like open up White's king even while you're at it, maybe. But get the weak pawn off the board, because again, if you take the pieces off, White, and that's why I don't necessarily think Black's in a position necessarily to lose, but I think he's going to be saddled sitting in an unpleasant endgame, which is where I probably could have gone later on the road. I mean, the engine spits out some idea later on where I try to win some pawn or whatever on the king
Yeah.
side, but it's equal at best, really.
Yeah.
And for practical purposes, I wouldn't be stupid enough to take that kind of a risk in that position, going after one pawn. That
Yeah.
even if I won, isn't going to turn the tables. It was going to be I'm just playing not to lose at that point. I mean, and once the queens got off the board, I really wasn't playing to win. I was just like, well, I don't have an attack. I'm probably not winning this game. It's more of, am I going to lose this game
Yeah.
now?
And I play
Um,
c4 in this next move. Obviously, you push here to use me to take, maybe undouble your pawns. I was so I
yeah,
how much time did I take here? I took 3 to 4 minutes. I should have just left the pawn on
yeah.
c3, and I did think about that, but I was a little bit worried about some sort of pressure coming down this d file on my d3 pawn. Like if I allow you to take on c3, I don't know, pawn takes back, and then I don't know, this bishop moves out of the way, and all of a sudden like your rooks flood. I guess the idea is that my rooks can defend just as well. Maybe this bishop comes to f1, but that's a little bit of
Yeah,
the
and I
reason
think
I
that's more of
locked.
a it's more of a hindsight, oh, maybe. Because in the game, when you're playing through this one, I mean, there's B5, there's C4 ideas for
Yeah,
black. I already have my rook on C8, and you're thinking of like, hey, I'm trying to shut down black's counterplay, and especially
yeah,
in the center because
yeah,
you felt
because
like
your
weak
pawns
pawns on
are
the E
also
file.
staring at nothing right now. So I was like, all
Yeah, it's
right,
like,
if
hey, if I lock down the center, black's bishops are kind of useless.
right,
So there's something to be said for that. Like even if it's long term, okay, maybe you kind of close the door on potential like activity on the queen side, but you also shutting down black's activity. So
yep,
the real test would be, do you believe in your activity on the king side?
yeah.
That would kind of make the
And I
whether you
was
play that or
thinking of
not.
a little bit of ideas. Like I knew I had my rook here on the a file, so
Hmm.
there was also ideas of myself possibly playing like a3, b4. I don't know, maybe we can support it like that.
Yep.
If this a pawn ever gets um, eliminated, all of a sudden we have a little bit of a weakness as well to attack. But yeah, I mean, I'm still have a little bit of a tangle of like we both have our pieces kind of a little bit tangled up. Like your bishops, you're trying to just get them active.
Yeah, it'll be once the queens go
Like
off the board, we're
my
back to the
rooks,
minor piece battle again.
right? My
All of our
rooks.
minor pieces need to get improved.
Yes, agreed, agreed. And this is where I make my like major mistake. So I allow. Oh yeah, yeah. So I didn't realize it obviously until well, first off, this just traps my dark square bishop, so now we can't even retreat back to d2 if we
Right.
want to keep the bishops on the board. And at the time, I was like, oh, my bishops are better. Like, we're going to have some pressure. Like you said, you're going to have to tie down a piece
Yep.
to maybe defend e6. And this just really just cuts off me saving my bishop, and I completely missed the idea that you can just push h6 here. So I definitely should have just taken on f8
Yeah.
and
Yeah. But at
whatever.
the end, it wasn't. I think the
It's
negative
scary. I
part
thought I
was
was
the
gonna
knight
lose.
move.
I thought I was gonna lose at
You
this
thought you were
point.
gonna lose in this? Yeah. See, I don't think you were gonna lose on position. And I could have played. I mean, I love end games. I could have played more, but with the match situation again, hey, you offered a draw. I'm taking the draw. I'm not even gonna risk anything. But in this position here, it's not even like the problem is your H pawn now got split up. So I think
Yes.
that took a lot of the wind out of your long term sails with the pawn structure because now it's not as clear where you're going to try to push if you're
And
trying to
it's
win.
super weak. The
Like
dark.
you're not pushing you're not it's not easy for you to lose this position in my opinion. But
Oh,
in terms
it's
of winning
scary,
it,
man. It's
which again yeah, but it's like if you're in a must win here position,
oh
this
yeah.
is like impossible
Oh,
almost. So
for
to
sure.
me it's like, okay, well now I don't have to worry about really losing this. I don't think I have anything really. I could push for a win, and I probably would have in a normal circumstance a little bit, but I didn't believe I actually had a win. Like it was
Well,
more of like
this.
White's going to have to make a major mistake here for me to really have a good chance of winning here. Because
Yeah.
even if I win the pawn, which I think in the end the engine line gives a chance for Black to try to push for winning a pawn, I don't
Yeah.
believe it's enough. It's just it's too easy to lock the position up.
Yeah. And I mean, the scary part is that this pawn's on a dark square, which, and I just lost my dark square bishop. My knight's not in a good position to really get over to defend it enough times. You all of a sudden have like your dark square bishops playing the game. So, uh, yeah, I was worried I was gonna be losing the H pawn, and then I don't know. I'm gonna have to defend an outside passer maybe, and your rooks are a lot easier to get active than mine. My king is because you could always put pressure on the F file. My king's just straight up blocking my rook on A1. So that's a little bit of the reason bishop moved to H3. We got to give squares for either our king to move up or can allow my A rook to be active. If you ever double up, which is what I know you have to defend.
Yep, defend the
Yeah, I
pawn,
mean,
right?
and our king's kind of a good defender in this position because it can help this rook. And then at this point, I kind of saw the draw possibility. I didn't see like what did we? I offered. I was kind of saying on stream too. I was like, I felt
Yeah,
bad
the game
offering a
ended
draw
here. The
because
engine line was
uh,
ridiculous to me. Like when it was telling, oh, Black can play. I'm like, what? This looks.
your rook is
Even if
like.
this is objectively okay, I'm not gonna put my rook trapped on the white side of the board and just say, oh yeah, this is fine. You know, like it.
Yeah,
No, not when I'm playing
you're
not to lose. Like that's not
-1, man.
happening.
Yeah, and I never know. Like I said, I wasn't aware of like the actual team standing implications, or I should say the team implications.
Yeah.
And I know it's sometimes poor etiquette. I don't if you play over the board yourself, Jordan, or not, to offer a draw when I felt like black was you were in the driver's seat a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And like you were going to be the one playing for the win. Like your pieces are a little bit better. So that's why I kind of hesitate. I mean, I end up offering the draw here because I think I saw that I can pretty much lock down.
Lock
Like,
it up.
yeah, like it's going to be a solid structure. But yeah, so I was like I said, I'm happy. Like, hey, you didn't take offense to that. You were actually just playing for a draw, like when it got to this point in the game, anyways. So,
Oh no, I don't think offensive. I think
um,
people should offer a job. I think it's funny when people offer a job and they're clearly like dead lost. You know, like they hang their queen. They're like, "Oh, you wanted to call it?" I had an opponent offer me a draw after he hung a knight
yeah,
in an over the board game years ago, and I was like, "Yeah, no, I'm
yeah.
gonna play
Obviously,
on." And then instead of he's trying to sell it, and he's looking at me like, "Oh, that's a mistake," type thing. You know, he's like, "I would have taken the draw," type thing. It's like, dude, you just hung your knight. Like, come on, you know,
yeah,
like
yeah. I think
let's
the
not
big
act
thing
like
is
you
like
just,
people. There's some angle. Sometimes in over the board, people claim that they see the hand extending and then they think the other person's resigning, or people can angle
Oh, and
shoot
yeah, when
sometimes.
I was playing
So
over the board
it
a
can be
couple
a little.
weekends ago, I told my kids that. I'm like, don't shake anyone's hand without them confirming that they are
Yeah,
resigning the game
exactly.
because you will run across someone at some point who will try to get
Yeah.
away with that. It's
I
like
think
it's
it's
not worth it.
common,
Like,
more common in the younger scholastic. Just hey, kids want to
hmm
win or they don't want to lose. So, but hey, adults do it too.
yeah.
So it's not like it's a
Well, yeah, and I'm just like, yeah, don't risk it. Just be like, hey, if they don't tip the king or make it clear, like, oh, good game, I give up or something. You know, it's like,
yeah,
don't shake their hand because they'll go, oh no, I was offering you a draw, like, saying, hey, I wasn't resigning.
yeah,
You know, like,
exactly,
um.
exactly. So
So anyway, but yeah, no, this game was fine. Like, I actually was gonna accept your draw. I moved right when
I
you
know I
offered
saw.
the
I
draw
was like
for.
contemplating. I think I was talking on stream. I was like, I don't know if I should offer the draw. Like, but kind of once I saw this structure, like I said, I was like, okay, like I don't think he's
Yeah.
breaking
See,
through that.
I wasn't going to offer you a draw because, again, I thought, oh, he has to play for a win. I'll wait for him to offer a draw
Okay,
because he's obviously going to decline if I do.
that's
Because,
funny.
only reason why he would accept a draw is if he's clearly in a dead loss position, like, okay, I guess I'm losing anyway. But I'm like,
Yep.
hey, he still has something to play for here. It's not clear that he's losing. He's maybe being a little uncomfortable, but there's no clear path for me to take advantage of. It's just
Yeah.
unpleasant, which,
I think it's
I
either
mean, people play on,
side or it's
yeah.
like bishop back. It's
But
one of
the
these two
but to
things.
highlight
It's
the
like
end game here, if we were going to play this on, the engine line is something I would never do.
okay, yeah, I didn't
Like
see you
that's
like you didn't
not.
even realize going at like it took you a few minutes to realize like the h5 pawn was the attacking. Like I was like, oh man, like back here, I think I was like, oh man, this pawn is dropping, and I was like, oh, this is an only move. This like all these things in my head, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, wait, I can actually go after this h pawn. I was like, oh my god, he wasn't even thinking about that. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Well, and I saw some of the ideas of going, but again, it was more of I just wanted to make sure my position was solid because even if I won the H pawn, I didn't believe it was going to be enough to necessarily win
okay,
anyway.
okay,
And I was more concerned with just making sure that you didn't have anything active going forward. Like if the game had continued, I wouldn't have been playing like moves like that necessarily. I probably would have played Rook F4 at some point, but I was more worried about like, okay, what is his knight going to do? His other rook's going to swing over, like,
yep,
and I believed I would have some play on the dark squares, but you're just going to play on the light squares, and that's what I felt like. Okay, it was going to be a while for my light square bishop to attack the H pawn,
yeah, yeah,
and even if I do all this work to win it, that's still like, eh. I mean, it's something, but it's not. So it was one of
yep,
those games where, yeah, you offer the draw, I'm going to take the draw because even if we played on, it's not like there probably wouldn't have been a draw later on. So it's like, hey, if he's willing to just call it a draw, I'll just take it a draw. We have a team match win. And it wasn't one of those positions where it's like, oh, I could have gotten a half point. It's easy.
yep,
I had
yep,
a draw back in round two on last season, and I was just blind. I was like completely forgetting about the queen side. I thought, oh, the king side it fizzled out. I'm not going to be able to break through. We'll just take a draw. And then I'm like, wait a second. All I do is transfer the rook over because the way his pieces were, he had no way to stop my advance on the queen side then. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, I had tunnel vision, like.
yeah,
But this game, I just don't believe there's anything. Both sides, I think, have a good enough position that it would be really hard for either side to do anything with reasonable play. Like, obviously, someone could just blunder something, but
right, right, right.
it's not like, oh, clearly you do this, 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 and then you're going to get an edge. And it's like, man, this looks like even the engine line here. It's like, okay, black might be a little better,
I
but
was I was playing
tell me how are
reasonable
you
moves
winning?
these last these last 4 or 5 moves, like what I would have played. But yeah, man, yeah, I think it was a fun game. I pulled out a new opening that I can stuff in my repertoire. I actually might pull that out later today. So I have a
All right,
lone
sometimes
wolf
that's what
game.
you have to do is just you play it and you learn it. And I think this game kind of showed that it's not like you have to have a lot of experience with it, right? Like it's a
Exactly.
system game,
It
so
is.
it's more of just finding the good middle game ideas. You don't have to worry so much about getting blown off the board in the opening necessarily, and that's how you learn sometimes. Sometimes you'll go, "Hey, this middle game idea I tried didn't work out. Maybe I should do this," or "Hey," So you have to do that by playing the game, especially when you're
100%.
playing those systems. It's a little harder to learn it like by going over like grandmaster games for example because they play it so different. Like you
Oh yeah.
play like players our level aren't going to come up with the ideas necessarily the masters do. So even if you're like, oh, I should do this, and then wait, they're doing some more setup, wait, what am I, this doesn't make
Exactly.
any sense now,
Exactly.
I got to do something of my own thing. So but I thought it was a pretty good game overall there, and I thought so it was a decent ideas. I was a little sad that the attack kind of fizzled out, but I wasn't so sold I believed it was going to happen anyway, especially once the queens got off the board. But the minor piece battle was actually a little fun because I felt like we had a little bit of that earlier in the opening
Oh yeah. The
in terms
tension
of, hey, how are we going to
was
get our pieces active?
crazy.
And then towards the end is the same way of, hey, how are we going to get the pieces active? I believe your pawn structure is a little bit better though. I think if you didn't have to trade off the dark squared bishop, I
Yeah.
would have been interested to see how that would have played out because I think once that dark squared
Oh,
bishop got that, you had
100%.
to ruin your kingside pawn
Right. Like,
structure.
what am I supposed to do?
At that
I'll
point,
draw.
it's like, okay, it's yeah,
Bishop's on
exactly.
like all
Like,
my
I
pawns are
mean,
on light
okay,
squares. Like it's a disaster. Like
yeah,
for
it's
pushing.
like right, exactly. So it's like, how are we pushing for a win as white? I mean, at this point, it's like, okay, I'm just gonna kind of board up, play
I don't
defense,
know.
and outside of my opponent doing something crazy stupid, it's just gonna be really a draw or something, like. Yeah, and I was wondering too with the knight, what was your plan for the knight?
I
How
don't
did you play?
even
I thought
know.
your
It would
knight
have
might try to.
maybe it would
Yeah, I thought your.
go
Yeah,
try to get
exactly.
here
I thought your
maybe
king goes on
or maybe
h3.
I don't know. Like
Yeah, I
maybe
thought your
goes
king goes
here.
on h3, and I thought your knight. See, I thought it's so hard to get your knight on there. I was trying to
Oh,
find a
it
way to
was
get
so
how to
awkward.
get your
Once I
knight
moved it to
active.
D2, it was such an awkward piece. Like not only did it like crap my own
Yeah.
dark square bishop, I was just like I was like, oh, it's got to be better. Oh no, originally I think I wanted to go. Oh yeah, so this was before the dark square, before the pawn on G3 was gone. So I think I wanted to
hmm
do,
Maybe go on g4. Well, no, because you're moving it off.
or it
H2
was
would be
maybe it
going to
was coming
g4.
back to F. Maybe it was like just coming into here. Maybe that was the idea. And
Okay.
then I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
it was just trying to
There,
get it better than
g5.
F1. Like
Something.
obviously, like once this pawn goes, like all of a sudden now probably the knight wants to go here. But yeah, it was
Right.
just like
Well, and you want to
quote
get your
unquote
A1 rook
improving
in and
move.
stuff.
Maybe like after this, maybe the knight's coming free. I
Yeah,
don't know.
maybe something like that.
So
Yeah.
it was just a
But
move that
I think that's where the last chance for you to really push for something in the end game went away is when the dark squared bishop issue happened. Because
uh,
then I was like, well,
I,
now your kingside pawn structure is fractured, and that actually is kind of negates my weak H pawn, and so now it's just whatever. It's a
and funny enough, that's like
how
one
it
of the
draws
quickest.
from.
I think one of the quickest moves I played. Like I actually gained time there. So like, so yeah, I played that with like 20 seconds of thinking or something like that, and led to the. I mean, at this position, I technically have a slight whatever half pawn advantage, but
Yeah.
it is what it is. So yeah, I learned a lot, man. I really appreciate you hopping on the stream here to do a review. I know it's been a little while since we actually played the game, but about a week. But I'd
Yeah.
love to do this
Yeah. About a
more.
week actually.
Hey man, if we ever get paired up again, I heard your idea of doing an OTB game, so I think that'd be a fun idea. Like especially because you live in the United States and everyone else lives in Europe. It feels like that we play
Right.
against.
Yeah. Actually, that's what I was saying because you're in Eastern time zone, so I don't know how far away you go because I'm in by like South Bend and stuff like that. But there was one player years ago that was closer to me. I forget where they were, but they were at the time. I want to say they might have been in Indianapolis or something. They were
Gotcha.
like three some hours away. But that was in the point of my life when I had like really young kids. I'm like, yeah, I can't like make a trek. That's not
Yeah,
happening.
yeah. No,
Like that's why I'm playing online because over the board was completely out of the question. So
yes.
but that was the closest I got where I was like, oh man, we are
Thanks, man.
so close. We could actually do something like that. The
Yeah.
timing was right. Like,
I'm down in Florida, so it's a little bit more of a drive, but hey, who knows if stars
oh
align at
yeah,
some
that would be.
point, then
That would be
but if you ever do, that'd be a
yeah.
fun stream to
I
watch.
did have who I had an opponent last. Um, I think it was last season who lived in Pennsylvania, I believe,
Oh,
somewhere if I
nice.
recall. And I was like,
For
oh
me.
well, that's so close. But even in Ohio, it's like 5 hours some drive. But yeah, it's one of those
Pipe
down the
dream.
line. I would love to play over the board sometime for the league game. I think that would be really cool. Just like the novelty
The
of it and all
uh
like that.
the last week 8, whatever the top is, I assume is it Swiss pairing for like the team pairings every week or no? Do you know how like how the teams get paired
I
up?
believe
Or,
it's Swiss. Yes, I
yeah,
believe it's Swiss.
yeah, the,
Yeah.
the top 2 teams should have to meet up for over the board play requirement.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's it. Even if
Fly
yeah,
everybody
the
in.
top two teams
Fly
can be,
everybody
yeah,
in.
right, fly everyone in, for like the championship or whatever. Or after the season, they do all their checks and everything. You say, okay, the top two teams now are going to play for the championship. Doesn't even matter what the match score is. Like they're just gonna,
Yeah, exactly.
like season 45, we're gonna have like an over the board, like whatever, esport, whatever, get the commentators on, all that good stuff.
Yeah,
But it's one of the things I love. That's what I liked about the team league in general, though. It's a little bit. It's about as close as you're gonna get time. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. The series league is about the closest you're gonna get to over the board time control, but team league
yeah.
is one of the
No, this
closest things you can get.
is this is by far the best online classical training, practice, competitiveness that I've ever seen. I don't know if anyone else has other leagues that they've played in, but and the
Yeah,
fairness, I think it's pretty. They've done. I mean, they've been doing it for 10 years now, I think, whatever. But they do a
yeah.
good job of cracking down on any of that type of stuff. So I tell people about this all the
Yeah, I
time.
think that the league is considering it's free. It's one of those situations where you're just like, even the minor faults they could have, it's like, but it's
Yep.
a free league. I mean,
Yeah. What are you
what
gonna
what
do?
else is there really to complain about? You get to play long time couple chess. It's minimal work for on your part generally,
Yep.
and it's fairly well run. And with the interface, like with Slack and stuff, it's
It's
not that
perfect.
hard like back in
That's
the day where like organizing
yeah.
something
This is
like
all
that, the amount
automated,
of man
pretty
hours
much.
needed. Yeah, it's so automated now that it's really easy to do. So I love that part of it. But I think it's a good segue for people wanting to learn before they go play over the board, or for people who can't play as much over the board to
Yep.
get that time control. Or like
Definitely.
you said, just even practice where it's like, hey, I can play this while I'm doing. There's a lot of people are
Yeah.
playing actively over the board and
I,
this as well. It's just kind of like a supplemental, or they try out opening ideas with it. So they play a
sure.
league game because like, oh, if it goes poorly, whatever, but they get their practice in so they can decide, hey, I'm going to try this over the board or something. So it's a
Yeah.
lot of fun with that,
And it's a good excuse to like
especially for you.
dive into more opening theory because you know who your opponent is. I've done a video on this
Yeah, and you don't get
already,
that over
but
the
it's
board
like
necessarily much, right?
you don't
So
know who
yeah,
your
you get
opponent
that
is over the
idea.
board. Like 99% of amateur chess players are gonna get their pairing like the hour before or whatever it is. Where this
Yeah,
you actually get to do a fun. I really enjoy that part of it, the prepping for the opponent, which you don't get as an amateur chess
yeah, and you get
player
to know
that often.
history.
So you
And
get
it's
to.
kind of fun because the longer you play in the league, the more chance you get to rematch players
That's
and stuff
true.
like that. Where
That's true.
over the years, there's a couple of players that they've had multiple games against each other over the seasons and whatever. That it's kind of a little fun segue. But you also get fresh new people too, which just keeps it fun too. It's not just like the same six people that you're playing over and
Obviously.
over. Where it's like, okay, I'm better than this person, I'm worse than this person. You kind of know where the game's going, like, but there is that element of you can study your opponents beforehand and stuff and get a sense of how they're playing a little bit, and you don't necessarily get that when you're an amateur player over the board as much. So I do like that, but yeah, it was a good game. Look forward to the rest of your season here. I don't know where your team's at. I haven't checked the
I
standings
think we're
recently to
gonna
see
win
what you're
this week.
saying, but
We're kind of in the same situation you guys were in when you faced us. Last time I looked, we had 4 points to one, so just needed a draw with one of our last 3 games. I drew again this week. But yeah, our team's turning it around. I think we were only at like 1.5 points. We won our first week, I think tied our second week, and then we've lost ever since then. So we're right in the ship, and hopefully
it,
we'll climb back up a little
yeah,
bit.
finish towards the season end, right? You get on the
Exactly.
upswing type thing.
Exactly. Well, hey, man, I appreciate
Cool.
you
Well,
coming in.
good
Best of
luck
luck.
in your lone wolf. Was it lone wolf you're playing
Yeah,
later
Lone
today?
Wolf.
I think it's
That's
lone
also
wolf. You
another
said.
great league, guys. That's 30 minutes with 30-second increments, so a little bit shorter. But anyone else that wants to play, a lot of the same
Yeah.
people kind of cross over as well, and they also have an under 1800 division as well. So people that want to play in not against
Well,
some
I
of
think
these
lone
top
wolf.
people.
One of the things that are good about lone wolf is it also gives you the opportunity to play stronger rated players,
True.
right?
Very
Because
true.
in the team league, everything's keeping
If
a little bit. In the lone wolf, you can
yeah,
have more gaps, which some people don't like. But players like me, I would love that would be like a boon. Like, oh, I get to play someone who's like several hundred points higher,
Yeah, you don't get that.
and you don't have to worry about losing for your team. It's just an individual game, right? So it's more for you. So losing is as much of a big deal like with your team, where it's like, oh man, but if I lose every game for my team, that kind of sucks for the team. Where in this
Right, right.
case, it's like, hey, I get a chance to play a high-rated player and really test myself on something. And
Exactly.
or what I usually like about high-rated players is they're usually better at punishing or finding your faults that you may not necessarily be aware of, because they're just, they can pinpoint that better generally. So it might help you bring up something that you can learn later on, like, oh, I didn't realize this in this line. There's this idea that I've never come across that they played that I need to learn. Like this is
Yeah.
a gap in my opening, or hey, this is a misplay in my general thought process I got to work on. So it's always fun to play something like that, and you get to play some lower rated players too, which you get some different actions. I personally is my board one's the same way Susie that it seems like they play better against the stronger opponents they play. When they play against weaker opponents, they actually do worse, because like it's like they're not used to seeing certain ideas. They're like, oh, they have to play this. Wait, what are they playing that for? This doesn't make any sense. I'm confused, like, and I think it kind of psychs people out
Throws them
sometimes
off.
when they play that, or they put more pressure to win because like, oh, I got to beat the player. So instead of playing the board, they're like, they're over pressing a position because like I can't just draw this guy. He's
Yep.
200 points lower than me. Come on, I got
Yeah,
to win this.
that's my game today. Like I won my first game and I'm on a 2-game losing streak. So facing Butter Pecan, I'm not sure. I think he has a lot of games in the league, but yeah, he's 1915. I'm 2080. Whether that's I should be that high or not. So it's like, oh, there's pressure.
Yeah.
There's pressure. It's like, oh, I got to win this one, but
Right. I need to get
it's
the
fun.
ship righted. I need to win this. I'm playing
Exactly.
a player I should beat,
Yeah,
right?
oh, yeah,
Because
he's
I'm
played in like
definitely,
10 plus
yeah.
seasons, so he's a long time member of the community. It looks like, and
I told my son that when he joined the league. I said, basically add 100 points to everyone's rating in the league, because most of the league players are much stronger than casual players on League Chess,
oh, he won
because they
the
take the games more seriously. They're usually prepping a lot of the times. It's not the same thing. A 1900 rated playing in League Chess, the team league or lone wolf and things like that, is generally not the same that you just casually challenge on League Chess and get a game with. People could be watching TV while they play. They could be trying some weird opening thing that
Yep.
it's a different beast. So just because you're playing someone that's lower rated doesn't necessarily mean it's an easier game all the time, because
No,
it's
definitely not.
like, oh, if all they do is play classical when they're in these serious league games, probably stronger than their rating, and especially if
Exactly.
they play strong competition all the time where they lose a lot more often, but they're learning a lot more, where they might be underrated. So it's a lot harder to judge those positions. But good luck in your game later and
Appreciate it,
the
man.
rest of the season.
Thank you. For those that are here, I will be streaming the Lone Wolf game, so that's at 7:30 Eastern, 23:30 UTC for everyone that can convert it. But appreciate it, Jordan, and hopefully we play again and we can do another review like this and get maybe reverse colors at some point.
Yeah, right. Reverse colors. You bet. Yeah, sure.
All right, brother.
It'll
Have a
be
good rest of
fun.
your weekend, and we'll talk again.